Career naval officer Captain Charles Merdinger was on the battleship Nevada at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked in World War II. He served during the Korean War, and he was at Vietnam for the Tet Offensive. Stay tuned to hear Dr. Charles Merdinger's story as a veteran of foreign wars.
Welcome to The Better Part, a program that encompasses a diverse spectrum of topics important to our community, which we hope will both inform and entertain you. We invite you to sit back and enjoy the program.
Our guest, Dr. Charles Merdinger, is a retired naval officer, civil engineer, and academic administrator. He was a Rhodes Scholar, and while at Oxford, obtained a PhD and was an all-star lacrosse player. He was head of the English, History, and Government Department at Annapolis Naval Academy, deputy director at Scripps Institute, vice president at Aspen Institute's think tank, and a president of a college. These are just a few of the interesting things he has done in his 93 years, including playing against the Harlem Globetrotters and kissing the Blarney Stone. Welcome, Dr. Merdinger. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you.
Now, there's a lot to talk about in your life and careers, plural, but we're here to talk about your foreign wars, your military career. And you did graduate from Annapolis Naval Academy. And what was your first assignment?
My first assignment was USS Nevada. I was on that, well, from the time I graduated. We were an early graduating class. We graduated in February. So it was 10 months to the day after graduating that we had Pearl Harbor, the attack on Pearl Harbor.
You were in Pearl Harbor at the time.
Yes, I was aboard ship. As a matter of fact, I was I was in my bunk when the war started, about 5 to 8 in the morning. And first thing I heard was the alarm, and I thought it was another drill. And I was putting on my socks, and the fellow ran by my room, and he said, "It's the real thing, it's the Japs." And then I heard horrendous boom, rattle of the machine guns, and then over the airwaves, the bosun was sounding, General quarters, all hands man your battle stations. This is no drill." And when I heard all this commotion out there, I knew that we were being attacked by the Japanese. So I hastily put on my hat, my dungarees, and my slippers. I didn't even have time to put on my shoes, left my room, went to my battle station, which was called the main battery plotting room, and it was several decks below the main deck. And I never saw my room again because very early on we were hit by a torpedo, and that slowed us up. But we were the only battleship to get underway, and it started at, as I mentioned, about 8 o'clock, and we got underway at about 8:25, and then the Japanese really jumped us when they saw us leaving the harbor. We were the only battleship, as I say, that actually got underway that morning.
Where now you actually didn't you have to run all this because the main officer of the ship was ashore at the time?
Well, put it this way, practically all the senior officers were ashore. So you only had the junior officers like myself, and of course most of the senior petty officers and that sort of thing were still there. But basically, we kind of fought the ship with a lot of junior officers in charge of things. In my battle station, which was the main battery plotting room, and that was the brains of the firing the big 14-inch guns. Well, we weren't firing 14-inch guns that morning, but it soon developed that we had a different mission. By the way, everybody there were about 15 of us, and normally there were 2 other officers senior to me, but they weren't there that morning, so that's how I happened to become in charge. So as I say, there were about 15 of us down there, and every one of us had earphones because we were attached to different parts of the ship. And so it rapidly became evident that we were probably the best source of information throughout the ship, because the main power had gone out, the main speaker system had gone out, and so on. So it became important that we stay as long as we could to keep other parts of the ship informed. And I recall just hearing every bit about the battle. I didn't see a thing, never saw the battle.
Was the ship on fire?
Because the ship was on fire. And, well, I started to say we got underway, the Japs jumped us, and we were hit by at least 5 bombs, which in turn set off explosions in the ship. So the ship was on fire, and we're trying to get out. And we were directed to beach the ship because it was very evident that we might sink right in the middle of the channel and block the whole harbor. So we pulled over to the side. Then later on we were pulled over to the other side, and we settled in a cane field. And the ship just slowly sank into the mud, and the water then started coming up. And the first real decision I had to make came about 25 minutes after it started, and I was told to send half my men topside to man the 5-inch guns because so many people had been killed up there. And I picked them on the basis of how important I thought the phones were, and so I just said Smith, Jones, so, and they said, aye, sir, and they left. There was no discussion, no nothing, just you fellows go and the others stay. Well, I think the ones that went thought that they might get shot or blasted or something up there, but on the other hand, the ones staying might drown, so it was a kind of a Hobson's choice. I think if I'd had my own way, I'd have got the heck out of there at that time, but at any rate, we ended up down in what ultimately became an air bubble. In other words, the water is rising throughout the ship. And, as I mentioned, we started this thing at 8 o'clock. We didn't have any fresh air down there, and we didn't get out till about 3 in the afternoon. And that was, well, that was something that we hadn't planned on. I mean, we always had come and gone through this one particular door in the room. And first of all, the water started dripping from overhead. We realized then that we were in an air bubble and we were going to have to get out of there sometime. And then the door by which we'd entered started to give way, the gaskets were going, and the water then was coming around our feet. And I called up to the executive officer and I said, Commander, I can hold 5 more minutes. Request permission to secure. I didn't know where I was going to secure to. I knew we couldn't go out the door we came in, but there's another door down at the other end, and none of us had ever been through it. We always went out this door. Well, obviously the water is coming in from that door, and hopefully the compartment next door is still going. And so we open the door, everybody goes through, and we get into the next, in going, I said, all right, all hands, we're leaving. Everybody took off his phones, wrapped them up on the bulkhead, just the way we'd always done after a drill. Here's the water coming in on everybody's feet, and it was just magnificent the way everybody responded. Nobody got excited. There was no yelling, no nothing. We just filed out. Now we're in another room, and it's going to go pretty soon, we know. But so we started to look for a way out of that room. Somebody discovered a hole in the ceiling there. Well, there was a tube, a communication tube that carried a lot of wires, and there were rungs there for maintenance people to go up and down. So we sent everybody up. Oh, by the way, I should add, maybe you've seen some of these submarine pictures where it's green light, everybody's sweating and everything. That's a true picture. That was what it looked like down there. Well, it's now 3 o'clock in the afternoon. As I say, this is about 8 hours later, and I'm the last one up. And about 2/3 of the way up, I smelled fresh air for the first time in several hours, and I thought, oh, it was the most beautiful breath of air I've ever taken. So then when I got up and out, and everybody else had preceded me, we were up near the bridge. Well, I looked around, and people were fighting fires below, and everywhere you looked, the world was on fire. All the buildings, the water, the oil on the water, the ships, and huge clouds of billowing smoke. Well, my first thought was, Lord, thanks that I got out this far. And the next was, boy, those Japs really did a professional job. I looked around, and boy, they had really knocked us out. And so the next question is, where do we go from here? Well, I was soaking wet, so I took all my dungarees, I hung them up to dry. Somebody walked off with them. My slippers got rotted off me. But the Marines had a little small store. Interestingly enough, there were shambles all around, but this particular place was still intact, and they had uniforms. So I went in and got a new uniform, shoes and everything else. Well, the captain decided I was the best dressed officer on the ship, and the next morning after things had calmed down, I was sent ashore to tell the wives of those officers aboard. Basically, the only people in those days who were married were the senior officers. Junior officers, for the most part, were not married. Very few enlisted men, maybe a chief, petty officer. So I only had a few of the more senior officers' wives to contact, and fortunately, most of their husbands had been ashore. They were trying to get to the ship during the worst part of the action.
How many people were killed or injured?
Well, you know, those figures are real dim in my mind now, but as I recall, we had over 50 who were killed on our ship. Of course, some of the other ships really suffered something badly. But I couldn't get to my room because it was underwater. But several weeks later, when we dewatered the ship, and I went to look for my room, it was gone, been blown away. I found my sword that had been blown 35 feet from where the room had been. And as you can see, it still looks pretty good as far as the sword is concerned. But the scabbard took a real beating. And this had shark skin on it and a nice gold tassel and everything. Of course, they got all burned up. And this particular thing, the scabbard, you can see that some of the
leather, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, some of that got burned off, and then the water came in, quenched it, and later on, I should add, we got married in 1944. This had been the sword that last year at Annapolis, all the first-classmen get their swords. So it was, about 1.5 years old or something, 2 years old. And in 1944, it was a kind of a beaten-up looking thing, but we used it on our wedding cake. And the rumor went around that it was a sword that belonged to my grandfather during the Civil War. Well, it's ancient enough to look that way.
Good story. You were the first to actually get out, then your ship got out, and you beached it, as you said. And then it had to be repaired, did it not?
Oh yes, the
and
ship.
you were put on another.
Right.
actual
I
ship.
stayed with the ship while we repaired it, and I might add that we had a number of. I watched 4 men die in front of me and going down into one of the compartments that had poisonous gases in it. So, in a sense, the war wasn't over on December 7th on that ship. We had lots of problems putting it back together again, dewatering it, and so on. But we brought it back to Bremerton in about April, and then I went to the new ship, the Alabama, which you see over there, and that was the newest battleship in the Navy. And then we went on the Murmansk run. We were in the North Atlantic and then the South Pacific. And you can't tell here, but I would stand off the deck watches underway on an open bridge. Now we didn't have many open bridges in those days, but that one did. And I'll tell you, in that run to Murmansk with 50-foot waves and horrible winds and everything else, standing watching that ship at that time was really something.
Oh my goodness,
It
that
bobbed
time
around
of
like
year.
a cork.
Oh my goodness. Now that was a convoy, and you...
We were standing off the convoy. The idea was that the von Tirpitz, which was a German pocket battleship, was basically holding up the whole British fleet, because if they got in the middle of one of these convoys, the merchantmen couldn't protect themselves, obviously. So we were there hanging on the side waiting for it to come out. It never did during our time. It was later found by the Royal Air Force in a fjord in Norway. But while we were up there, we were very conscious. We had a lot of problems with the German submarines, obviously. And the German bomber command out of Trondheim was another nuisance. So we, in a sense, we saw a lot of bad weather. And
how many ships were in the convoy?
oh my goodness, I have no idea. I do recall that when we were coming over, before we joined one of these convoys, when we were coming to Iceland, we had carriers, cruisers, destroyers, battleships, the whole 9 yards. And there's several ships, but as to numbers, I've kind of forgotten.
Getting them all together, meeting up, you know, the rendezvous or whatever, and falling out a long distance, it's dangerous.
That was very tricky, and as a matter of fact, that's why when you stood off to the deck watch, in a sense, you were standing in place of the captain to order the ship right rudder, so many knots, and so on. And so there was a lot of responsibility for a young officer at that time.
So where did you ended, this convoy was going to the South Pacific then?
Yes, after our tour in the North Atlantic, we were down the South Pacific, and we were there with the start of the return of the U.S. Navy to the South Pacific. And so we were in combat down there in the Gilbert Islands, for example, Nauru, and so many islands I've kind of forgotten their names. Tarawa comes to mind, and so on, that we were there.
Where did you serve, and what did you do during the Korean War?
During the Korean War, oh, by the way, at the end of the war, I shifted from the line. I was no longer a seagoing officer. Navy sent me to postgraduate school at RPI, and I became a civil engineer. So I was now with the Seabees. And for the Korean War, I was head of the Seabees on Adak in the Aleutian Islands, which is the most godforsaken place in the world. If you take all the days of sunshine together in a year, you'd get about 2 weeks of sun up there. And it continually was raining or hail or snow or something else. It was the same kind of weather we had up on the Murmansk run, only we were on the ground. And we, as the Seabees, our job was basically public works. In other words, keep the power lines up, keep the water lines open, and so on. And the heat. There were, I'd say about 4,500 people up on this island. And we covered a space about the size of Washington, D.C. So we had power plants in various places, and they were always going out. It was a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour job up there.
That was kind of the last outpost for the
Yeah,
Pacific
in a
War.
sense it was, yes.
And then after you finished with that, you did something kind of fun, stateside, didn't you?
Well, I had I got a call from the detailer in Washington just before I was to be relieved up at ADAC, and he said, "Where would you like to know next? We know it's been a tough tour. We'd like to give you what you want." You know, normally nobody asks you where, they just send you. But in this case, I said, well, I kind of like an airfield in Southern California. And the next thing you know, I get orders to the Naval Air Station Miramar. You know, that was a Top Gun station. It became famous. It was the first master jet station in the Navy. Well, they said, "You're going to Miramar." And I said, "Miramar?" I said, "I never heard of it." And they said, "Oh, you're going to build it." So that was my first job returning from the Pacific there.
So you built Miramar.
Yeah, well, I was the resident engineer in charge of building the place. Obviously, a lot of other people had a hand in it, but yes, I was the resident engineer for that.
And then came...
Then I went to command the research laboratory in Port Hueneme, and we had scientists that went all over the world, North Pole, South Pole, and everything else, and that was a very exciting assignment. And from there, I went to Japan to head up the public works there in Yokosuka, and I had a couple of thousand Japanese working for me at that time, and again, this was public works. And public works defined in the Navy not only the plumbers and carpenters, but also all the vehicle drivers and the cranes and the trains and everything else.
Tell me about Vietnam then, because I know you were overseeing a massive operation.
Yeah. Well, my title was Public Works Officer, and our organization was Public Works Da Nang. Da Nang was our headquarters, but we had troops all over I Corps, which was 1/4, the northern quarter of Vietnam for military purposes. So we had troops. There were about 4,500 people scattered around. Sometimes there would only be 2 in a little village, and others we would have well more than 1,000. Now, we were primarily a Seabee organization, but we augmented with a number of civilians from Asia. We had, of course, Vietnamese. We had people from Taiwan, the Philippines, all the backwash of Asia. I think we even had some Viet Cong in the organization.
Unknown to you at the time, I suppose. But so it was plumbing and power and roads and
yeah.
buildings. And,
one
and
statistic, I was looking at this up the other day, one statistic was that we repaired 100 flat tires a day.
Oh my goodness! So
in our transportation organization.
I remember that I heard somewhere that you were always helping, like the airfields would be blown up, and you would be out there right away.
I spent a lot of time.
So they could take off
The
again.
Viet Cong normally during my time there didn't start anything till about 1 in the morning. I don't know how many sleepless nights I had running over to the airfield with, you know, the fires were going and things were blown up and so on, and we had to put it back together again. So I would go over and kind of assess what it was that we had to do, and we'd have our Seabees out there quickly, and the Marines really enjoyed it. As a matter of fact, I have a number of plaques from the various Marine organizations thanking, they call me their daddy Seabee.
Oh.
And one of the things that I'd like to point out here was that there are very positive aspects. You know, the Vietnam War has a pretty, it leaves a pretty bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, but there was some good that came out of it, and I like to think that we were part of that. In other words, we took these Vietnamese, and most of them had no skills at all. We took them in, we made them plumbers, carpenters, electricians, the whole gamut. And I used to say, I don't know politically what's going to happen in this war, but we will have left a legacy there. We have taught a whole generation sanitation, we've taught them these various skills, and I think that's a real positive thing that came out of Vietnam.
That's really good to hear. And then, of course, you were not only supporting the troops, you were helping the Red Cross.
We were right with the Marines. As a matter of fact, we were so close to them when they had their Marine ceremony. You know, once a year, our Seabees stood their watches, and when we had our Seabee celebrations, the Marines came over and stood our Seabee watches.
Now, you got caught up in the Tet Offensive.
Yes.
How did that happen?
That was when we had fighting in the streets right in Da Nang. I was in Da Nang, of course, when it started, but I also had troops up in Hue. As a matter of fact, I had troops that went all the way up to the DMZ. But I went up to Hue to see how our troops were doing up there, and I ended up in a firefight in a Marine command post. And to this day, I don't remember how I got out of there.
You seem to be pretty good at escaping, don't you?
Well, it's true. I've been very fortunate in that score. You know, I've had people get blown up just a few feet from me, and nothing ever happened to me. I never even got a cold.
Well, you wanted to be in the military from a little boy. You were in the Boy Scouts and the ROTC, and I think you had some military people in your family.
Right.
And
well, we weren't. Well,
your daughter.
Everybody named Charles went to war in the family. In other words, my Uncle Charlie was in the Spanish-American War. My Uncle Charles was a World War I, and I took World War II and the Vietnam War and Korean War, and then my daughter came along, Susan. She retired as a commander in the Navy, but she had volunteered during the time of some of the nonsense going on in the Middle East. She'd been trained in Arabic and so on, but at that time they didn't want women in there, so she never went. She went to Germany and Okinawa. She was commander of the port there, but she never did get a chance to use her Arabic.
Well, maybe she was lucky, but thanks so much for coming and telling us all this interesting information, really.
Real pleasure.
I enjoyed it.
Thanks very much.